Well, here it is, friends, part 2 of my Every Scale Explained series. In this video, I want to take a look at a few other scales you'll realistically encounter, but are definitely a lot more uncommon than major, minor, and the modes. I do acknowledge that the series name is still a bit of a misnomer, because I will unfortunately not be covering every single scale. I'm sorry guys, there's just way too many named and documented scales out there. About a week ago, one of my friends asked, "Oh, you're a musician? Name every scale." And it stun-locked me for a week in the general chat of my Discord server.
1 week later.
As I mentioned in the intro, this is the part 2 of my Every Scale Explained series, so make sure to watch part 1 first. But the good news is that we can skip my whole scale preamble and just go directly into scales and listen to some tunes. So let's start with perhaps the most conspicuous absence from the first video, Melodic Minor. Melodic minor is typically thought of as the third of the classical minor trinity, next to natural minor and harmonic minor. But I've always felt melodic minor is kind of a weird outlier. It's pretty much one of our only scales in Western music theory that has a distinction between ascending and descending. The descending part is indistinguishable from natural minor, but the ascending part is rather unique. We can see how ascending, it kind of does this thing where half of the scale walks up in minor, while the other half actually sounds like the latter half of the major scale. This has some interesting harmonic implications, but typically, as the name would imply, this scale is used actually as a melodic device, which is why there's an ascending-descending distinction. Melodic minor gives us this raised 7th scale degree seen in harmonic minor, which allows for that nice 7-to-1 leading tone resolution. But it also raises our 6th scale degree, which kind of fixes, so to speak, that awkward gap from harmonic minor. In terms of the sound, you can kind of think of it as a funny combination of Dorian and harmonic minor. And I suppose also natural minor for the descending half, which kind of allows the melody to blend between these different minor sounds rather seamlessly. But that's enough expositional yapping. Let's take a listen to this scale as it appears briefly in Hollow Knight's Grim theme. We immediately have everything we need for a pretty convincing melodic minor. The first bit more or less outlines our harmonic minor sound, but we get this classic 5-6-7-1 move that identifies it as melodic minor. This following descending figure breaks our melodic minor just a bit, but otherwise this opening ostinato actually contains all of our melodic minor scale degrees, at least the ascending ones. Of course, this tune is very inspired by Bach's iconic toccata and fugue. And almost always you'll find that melodic minor is used to evoke a sound that's very classical or baroque, or genres that lean into the same sensibilities. But outside of these contexts, melodic minor is honestly quite uncommon, and pretty much doesn't appear as a tonality. As both a melodic and harmonic device, I kind of just think of melodic minor as a classical precursor of our more modern-day composite minor. I also think of it as the most efficient way to torture CM and ABRSM kids. Thus far in both videos, we've only looked at heptatonic scales, meaning scales with 7 notes. But probably the most common non-heptatonic scales are the pentatonic scales, scales made of 5 notes. A pentatonic scale typically can be any combination of 5 notes, but colloquially refers to major pentatonic, which looks like this. You can easily visualize major pentatonic by looking at the black keys on a piano, which forms F-sharp or G-flat pentatonic, which is what I have here. The scale is deceptively simple sounding, but has a lot of interesting things going on with its construction. First, the intervals between the notes. Every scale we've seen thus far has some combination of half steps and whole steps, or minor seconds and major seconds respectively. But due to the amount of notes in pentatonic, there is just simply more empty space, so we have minor thirds between the 3rd and 4th scale degrees, and the 5th and tonic degrees. and the rest of the notes are separated by major second. We entirely lack that minor second between any of our notes. In fact, you can think of major pentatonic as just regular major, but we remove the 4th and 7th scale degrees, both of which being the source of our minor seconds in major and the source of our tension and functionality. We kind of just gut major of these slight dissonances, and what we're left with is a super consonant modular scale. I can play all of these notes next to each other, or even all at once, but it'll never have that crunch you get from other scales if you do the same thing. We'll talk some more about pentatonic in a bit, but I'm getting carried away again. Let's take a listen to a tune entirely in major pentatonic, the iconic Minecraft from Minecraft. The simplicity of major pentatonic works wonderfully for this theme. It's just so calm and meandering. We kind of just weave through this vaguely G-flat major-ish flavor. Since there's no pull and release, it barely even feels like the harmony even changes. Compare this to if it was more functional and classically major. It suddenly becomes so rigid and structured. Because of the lack of dissonances and direction in pentatonic, there aren't really any wrong notes, so to speak. Any note can convincingly play and tessellate over any other note, and any note can go to any note without any awkward or jarring intervals. And I think this sound works wonderfully in this game of freedom and open-ended creativity, and I suppose begrudgingly also in a live-action cash grab. But we also have another rather common pentatonic scale, that being minor pentatonic. This scale has similar properties to major pentatonic in that it's also just a series of major seconds and minor thirds. In fact, just like natural minor or Aeolian is a mode of major, so too is minor pentatonic to major pentatonic. We can see an example of an entirely minor pentatonic melody in the Squid Sisters' Calamari Incantation. It's just so catchy. What I like about this tune versus Minecraft is how the harmony isn't in pentatonic. In fact, it leverages the kind notes of minor pentatonic to imply some cool reharms in the second half. Both major and minor pentatonic give a kind of folk music sound, which makes a lot of sense for Minecraft, but even applies here. In Universe, this tune was actually adapted from a traditional Inkling folk song, obviously meant to imitate traditional Japanese folk music. And I think it's cool how that still shines through with this pentatonic melody, even given the electronic instrumentation and reharms, now lending a slightly jazzier flavor. Speaking of which, minor pentatonic is actually very similar to another scale. The blues scale is hexatonic, or 6 notes. It can typically be thought of as minor pentatonic except with one extra note, the sharp 4. One interesting thing about the blues scale is this cluster of half steps in the middle of the scale, something we haven't really seen thus far. It kind of gives this idiosyncratic, smooth, steppy quality to melodies that use the blues scale. We can very easily hear this kind of sound in Pepperman's Strikes from Pizza Tower. Super straightforward. We pretty much just walk up and down the blues scale pretty verbatim. It has a pretty heavy contrast to minor pentatonic in how it really accentuates that tritone relationship between the sharp 4 and 1. Just a little bit of bluesy twang. The gigantic elephant in the room when it comes to the blues scale is simply how much depth there is to the blues as an idiom. You'll often find this minor flavored scale is played over major key chord changes in a blues, giving this bluesy kind of crunch. Even the scale itself is kind of a loose definition. Some consider the blues scale to have more notes. It also commonly features some tasteful microtonality with the eponymous blue notes.
Why are you blue?
Which I talked about in my microtonality video. One interesting idea posited by my harmony teacher back at Berkeley is that the blues scale is just the tetrachord or first four notes, which can be stacked infinitely upwards. Jacob Collier fans might be familiar with this idea as it relates to super ultra hyper mega meta Lydian, which I might talk about in part 3, but let's see what happens when we just recursively stack the same tetrachord. It's the blues, but gives us some other wacky notes to work with, like the flat 2, natural 2, and flat 6 as higher tensions, so to speak. Honestly though, none of this even scratches the surface when it comes to the blues as a style. I'll probably just make a full video at some point. Also wait, oh my god, I just realized while recording this, Among Us Drip also uses the blues scale. This video is brought to you by Materia Editions. Materia Editions proudly presents the scorebook for Guild Wars 2 Living World Season 2, featuring all 19 tracks from the original soundtrack in full score. The book features music from composers Maclaine Diemer, Lena Raine, and Stan LePard. And let me tell you, I am absolutely loving this book. Of course, all three of these composers are legendary, and each has contributed bangers to this diverse and lush soundtrack. I've been listening to the Guild Wars 2 soundtrack since receiving this, and it's been really cool to be able to pick apart all the little pieces of the orchestration to analyze. Honestly, it gives me some orchestration ideas for things I've been meaning to write. And there's more than just score. Included within the book is official art from Guild Wars 2, which is beautifully rendered in these multi-page spreads. This full conductor scorebook is a great addition to your music score collection, whether you're a composer, conductor, music student, or just a fan of Guild Wars. It's available as both a physical book and digital download. Check out Materia Editions to grab your copy today. Link is in the description. This scale is a pretty fun one. Let's take a look at the mystifying whole tone scale. Immediately a very striking kind of sound, and the construction is very unique. It's another hexatonic scale, and as the name would imply, is made entirely of whole steps, or major seconds. This is our first example of a translationally symmetrical scale, which sounds rather daunting, but check this out. If I start our D whole tone scale on, say, F sharp, we retain the exact same shape. It's still whole tone. And this applies to every other starting point as well. Every mode of D whole tone retains all of the same notes and retains the whole tone scale shape. Because of this, there are only two distinct whole tone scales, this one and the one using the 6 notes not seen here, such as E flat whole tone. Let's take a look at how this sounds in a tune. Mystic Forest A from Mario vs. Donkey Kong is entirely in D whole tone. It sounds rather major-ish because of our major third, but we lack the fifth. Our tonic triad is kind of this D-augmented flavor. It's just such a teetery, off-kilter sound, obviously very fitting of a place called Mystic Forest. Because the scale is so symmetrical, it simultaneously doesn't have strong pulls in any direction, but it's also kind of pulling us in every direction because of how augmented it sounds. This example is honestly a pretty rare case of the tonality being entirely in whole tone. Otherwise, you'll often hear whole tone as just a scale that so easily wants to rise or fall infinitely. That mystifying, dreamlike quality is probably why it appears as the stereotypical flashback sound effect. So let's now take a look at another symmetrical scale, but this time octatonic, or 8 notes. The half-whole diminished scale, as the name would also imply, alternates half and whole steps. Definitely a pretty wacky kind of sound. Because of this repeating half-whole pattern, we can start on C, E flat, or F sharp and retain the same notes, and our half-whole diminished scale shape. Per its namesake, the diminished scale contains the diminished 7th chord. In fact, the scale is just 2 interwoven diminished chords. You Because of the inherent instability of this sound, you very, very rarely hear this used as a true tonality, but it works quite nicely as this weird, almost cartoonishly dark melody seen in the Madame Brood fight in Mario Odyssey. The first two notes of the melody could easily be found in just regular A minor, but we really feel that diminished scale flavor in the following measure, where we just walk up and down a pretty convincing diminished scale snippet. One thing I actually quite like about the whole half diminished scale is that it kind of just cheats its way into sounding more stable. Though the tonic chord is technically fully diminished, the scale contains the 5th and flat 7th scale degrees, so you can kind of just use those notes melodically to give a more classically minor, stable kind of sound. It's for this reason that you much more often hear half-whole diminished used compared to its counterpart whole half diminished, which lacks our kinder perfect 5th and flat 7th. In fact, I actually couldn't even find any examples of whole half diminished in video games, but if you guys know of any, send it my way and you'll hear it in part 3. But let's bring it back around to heptatonic land, or our typical 7-note scales. One of my favorite scales is the goofy-sounding Lydian Dominant. You can kind of think about this as the fun little hybrid between Lydian with the sharp 4 and Mixolydian with the flat 7. The resulting scale is just so silly, this Danny Elfman-ish kind of flavor. And of course it works perfectly as the melody in the theme of the main character from Skyward Sword, Groose. This melody mainly outlines our 1 dominant 7 seen in Mixolydian. But at the tail end of the phrase, we get these chromatic steps between the 5th G and sharp 4 F sharp, giving us our Lydian influence. Super simple, super effective. The clumsy sound of Mixolydian's flat 7 combined with that mildly comedic sharp 4 from Lydian is just such a fun theme for this oafish brute with a heart of gold. Something interesting about Lydian Dominant is that it can actually be derived as the 4th mode of Melodic Minor. It's something cool to think about, and perhaps a bit daunting, but since Melodic and Harmonic Minor aren't derived from Major, they each have their own unique sets of modes as well. We'll take a look at a few of these in a second, but I would highly recommend these videos from 8-Bit and David Bennett if you guys want to see more. But speaking of melodic minor modes, what about the 5th mode of melodic minor, Mixolydian flat 6? As the name would imply, Mixo flat 6 is like Mixolydian with a flat 6. The resulting scale is rather interesting. I kind of think of it as the anti-melodic minor. We talked earlier about how melodic minor is kind of half of minor and half of major. Mixolydian flat 6 sounds like the opposite. The first half is identical to major, the second half sounds like it's from natural minor. And the result is this interesting hybrid sounding scale, much like melodic minor. Our 1 chord, our home, is major, but we have these slightly spicier notes later in the scale from minor. Take a listen to how it sounds in Route 111 from Pokemon. We can see how the harmony is very similar to something you would see in regular Mixolydian, vamping between 1 major and 5 minor. But the melody and counter melody is where we get our sauce, that flat 6 scale degree that synergizes so nicely with our lowered 7th as well. We can hear that kind of minor flavored run down the scale in this section. As mentioned earlier, it's kind of a wonderful mode where we can have this bright, forward major sound, but have these pulling minor colors over top. It's a bit dramatic, a tad mysterious, and evokes a kind of adventure-y sound in my opinion, very fitting of this desert ruins kind of setting. The scale is also adjacent in sound to our next scale, which I suppose we'll just talk about now. The fan favorite Phrygian Dominant, which is very similar to Mixolydian flat 6, except we also lower the 2 to a flat 2, similar to Phrygian, but also giving us this large augmented second to our major third. And that one flat 2-3 makes all the difference, definitely making our scale spicier and giving it more pull. This scale can be heard in Super Mario Galaxy's Dusty Dune Galaxy. Phrygian Dominant is most often characterized by its iconic 1 to flat 2 chord progression, similar to what happens in Phrygian except with a 1 major instead of 1 minor. And as mentioned earlier, melodically has this 1 flat 2-3 movement. If you're thinking it sounds a bit harmonic minor-ish, you're actually correct. Phrygian Dominant is just a mode of harmonic minor, and probably the most common one at that. It takes that flat 6, raised 7, 1 kind of sound from harmonic minor, and kinda just slides it over to the front. Phrygian Dominant is very stereotypically used in desert settings, as it's similar to scales seen in Indian and Middle Eastern music. I've talked about this in my Hades video, and will probably talk about it in my eventual desert music video, so I won't dwell on this too much, but it's a huge cliche, and you've definitely heard this kind of association before. So let's now take a look at the final scale of the video, the super dramatic sounding double harmonic major. It's almost like a super Phrygian Dominant, identical except also with a raised 7th. It makes it sound like some hybrid between Phrygian Dominant and harmonic minor. We uniquely have 2 augmented seconds in the scale. Something cool about the construction is that it's just 2 Phrygian Dominant tetrachords stacked on top of each other. There's probably no better example to demonstrate double harmonic major than perhaps the de facto theme of Doom Eternal, The Only Thing They Fear Is You. God, I love this theme so much. First, let's take a look at our main riff. Measure 1 only has 3 distinct notes, but it's pretty much the 3 notes we need for it to read as double harmonic major. We have our 1, the raised 7th, and flat 2 scale degrees. We even get that bendy major 3rd in the second measure. I also love the chromaticism of this scale. It sounds so non-functional, but the scale is also hyper-functional at the same time. It's pretty much one of our only scales with both a raised 7th and flat 2, both of which pull so strongly back to our 1. The D and F flat at the end of the measure form this nice little sandwich that falls back into our 1, in classical terminology called chromatic double neighbor tones. And let's take a look at that melody. The melody glides up from our tonic up to the major 7th, and then walks down that harmonic minor kind of sequence before landing on our major 3rd. The sequence repeats, rising slightly higher to our flat 2, then at the end we have this crunchy F flat played a minor 9th above our E flat in the bass. It's cool as hell and very, very fitting for this theme. Double harmonic major is super common in metal and such because it's so easy to write dark and evil music with this scale. The 2 augmented seconds and half steps surrounding the tonic is just so heavy. And at least in this case, a real glimpse into Mick Gordon's dark and twisted reality. And that's all we got for now. I'll probably make another 1 or maybe 2 scale videos at some point once I have enough tunes to work with. If you guys want to see some Dorian Sharp 4, Lydian Sharp 2, or the fabled Super Ultra Hyper Mega Meta Lydian, post some of your favorite obscure scale tunes in the comments. But anyways, this video took a second to finish, so I'm gonna go relax and play some Fortnite. Oh gosh, darn it.